So, Dr. Baker, Dr. Reyes, you know that the theology of joy and a good life, part of the purpose is we really want to build a movement. And if you were to imagine 5 years from now what joy and human flourishing would look like with adolescents, what would you imagine? What are some of the things that you would want to see happening 5 years from now?
So I'm just thinking concretely about my community, which is very racially diverse, and like many communities in America, has a racial equity gap in education and in all kinds of services. We just don't come close to providing for our students of color, for our children of color, what is provided for non-students of color. So I'm imagining that if our curriculum were to become part of the mindset of youth ministers in my community of Lynchburg, Virginia, we would have both spaces for young people of color to process the violence of generational poverty. And by process, I mean tell their stories, find the holy in their experience, and know through that communal kind of storytelling process that they are beloved children of God who are intended for joy and flourishing and agency. They were created for a purpose. And that would take place through freedom schools. That would take place through, just a cluster of organizations that don't just come in to help them get admitted to college, but are also there supporting them as first-generation college students as they bump into the obstacles that are there.
Right.
That almost seem to be placed there on purpose. And it would be a disruption of the violence of the cradle to prison pipeline. That's what it would look like in Lynchburg, Virginia, the community that I'm most connected to now, if this curriculum of joy and human flourishing were to take off.
I think for me, kind of along similar lines, and I've been out of my home community for a while now, but I think about it. Salinas, California, majority Latino, poor. There's no higher education there. I could think of all the things that I've experienced now being out of that community as being there. So, college, those sorts of more social enterprises, more things, job opportunities for young people. But I think it's something more. In 5 years, I would love to see a culture shift in terms of what Salinas not as a zone of social abandonment, as a place where the rest of the country kind of looks away from. We produce the lettuce and the fruit and the food that goes on your plate, but that's pretty much it. I would love for a culture shift to see, for the church to see Salinas or places like it, Central Valley in California, as a place where the future leaders are coming from. This shift, and regardless of whether or not they're raised in the church, that this is where the next generation of Christian leaders are going to come from. And I think that culture shift needs to happen at a very systemic, wide level. We always pull our leaders from the places that we know. We go within the church, we go within our theological institutions and say, well, this person has good pedigree. Someone asked me a question about what my pedigree was. I went to state college because it was $3,500 a year and I could pay for it while working full-time. I did the same thing through my doctorate. I could work full-time and pay for my doctorate. These are things that I had unique advantages and opportunities because I had people around me who could support me in all that work, but also took risks with this full-time work. But that's not all my colleagues experienced. Those with pedigree, traditional pedigree, they had conditions in which they could just focus on their ministry or focus on their studies. And I would love to see a culture shift where they go back to folks who don't have access, like those in Salinas, and say, how do we pull the next generation of leaders, and what are the conditions that they're actually calling for in that location, so that way they can thrive. And I would love a culture shift around that we start looking at different places and looking for different leaders. And that's what I'd love to see in 5 years. If this thing takes off, I would love for people to be looking in Salinas for the next generation of Christian leaders. Yeah.
I often wonder if the next generation of Christian leaders which is something we talk a lot about at FTE. That's our mission, is to cultivate the next generation of leaders for the church and the Theological Academy. And I believe a lot of the leaders are incarcerated. I believe they're there. And I believe that I'm so inspired by the programs that are teaching inside and that are cultivating the innate leadership of people who've been incarcerated. I wanted to say one other thing, and I'm trying to go back and grab it. Okay. So a lot of times when I look out at the field of youth ministry, it often looks like it supports the field of mainline and non-denominational churches, which sometimes have the feel of country clubs or of social gatherings exclusively, where people who are in the same economic range gather together to support one another, which is not a bad thing. I just would imagine 5 years out what it would look like if the church took seriously the mandate to really be diverse and to see the diversity that God has created in all aspects of our lives as a gift. And that we as youth ministers could be bridge crossers, that we could take people into places where they might not be used to going or used to making friends, and we could kind of lead in that journey back and forth. And if we could do that leading back and forth, we could shape a culture that learns from all and that doesn't continue to sequester resources for some when others go without. Youth ministry is a really powerful place of influence for our communities and for our nation and for our world. And I don't want that to be squandered.